Hello again, and welcome to the fourth and final video in my series about getting started with your Fujifilm camera. I'll leave links down below to parts 1, 2, and 3. This part will be about drive modes, the Q menu, and the viewfinder display elements, what's in there. So we're going to get started with the drive modes. We'll talk about what that means and why you might be curious about how to work with that. So drive mode refers to what happens when you push the shutter button. How many photos does it create, as well as what it does when it's creating those photos. So here's some of the options. You get to this menu by hitting the drive button on your camera, and depending on your camera will determine where that is. So the first option here is still image. So that is when you click the button on your camera to create a photo, it creates one photo. So here's what that looks like with single image, still image photo. So you're just gonna hold down the button. So I'm holding down the button and it's gonna make one photo. So I'm pushing the button down, I haven't let up, it's still there, and it's only made one photo. So I'll let go of the button and you can see that's how that works. Next, we have CH, continuous high speed burst mode. Your options here will depend on the camera you're using. The higher the number means the more numbers of frames per second it will create. So the 10 means 10 frames per second, 15 means 15 frames per second. You'll notice on my settings here, I only have the option for 10 or 15. 20, 30, and 40 are grayed out. I'll get to that in just a second. Let's talk about how this works real quick. So my setting is at 10 frames per second here, but I'm going to set my camera to 15 frames per second so I can show you what that looks like. So I'm going to hold down the button and it's going to make 15 photos per second as long as I hold the button down. So here we go. So that's a lot of photos. Even in just a couple seconds, that's a lot of photos. One limit to this is your camera internal memory, what's called a buffer, and your memory card. So your internal memory might fill up really quickly so that you only may get, if you're in high speed continuous, you may only get a second or two of photos before it stops creating photos and it slows down. It might go don't for each photo because it has to clear the buffer to write to the memory card. The other thing to consider in this is how fast your memory card is. For most situations, most of us don't need super fast memory cards, but if you're in a situation where you need that continuous high-speed burst and you need that for multiple seconds at a time, you might consider a faster memory card. And if you have questions about that, leave them in the comments below and I can be more specific. But let's move on with this part next. So the reason here that my camera is grayed out for those 20, 30, and 40 frames per second is because those modes are only available when I'm in electronic shutter. So I changed from mechanical shutter. See part 1 and part 2 of this video series for more information about that. When I'm in electronic shutter, there's less moving parts literally, so the camera can operate at those higher burst modes. The H crop mode that you see next is grayed out on my camera because that only is available also in electronic shutter mode. So what H crop does is it makes a smaller image because it's not using the full size of your sensor. It crops by about 25%, I believe. But again, you could have the faster speeds with that. What continuous low does is kind of like continuous high, but it's just slower. So if you still want a quick sequence of photos, but you don't need 10 or 15 frames per second, here's where you go for that. So this is, I use this quite a bit in portrait photography because the subject isn't moving very fast, but I do want to catch those little expressions, those little looks, and in between blinks. My setting I use most of the time for this is 5 frames per second, and that sounds like this. So this is 5 frames per second with a mechanical shutter. So it's still quick, making lots of photos, but it's not so fast as that 15 frames per second. And just remember, if you make 15 frames per second, you have to look at all those photos to find the one that is the right one that you want to use. So give and take. It's neat to have the opportunity to do it for continuous high speed, but it's pretty rare in my world that I do use it. But if you're into bird photography or sports or anything with lots and lots of action, continuous high speed is a wonderful thing to have in your camera. The next setting is ISO bracket. So if you're bracketing your photos, if you're not sure what that is all about, see part 1 or part 2 of this video to find out about that. Here's what your ISO bracket settings would be. Similarly here with white balance bracketing, it will determine how much your white balance changes between photos. Next up here in drive mode is the bracket settings themselves, and you have 4 different options for the bracket settings. The first setting here is exposure bracketing, so it will change the brightness in the photo with each photo that's made. And the neat thing about this is you can set your camera up when you're in bracket mode, or in my case, I have my camera set up to do this with the custom 1 mode, that it will make now 5 photos. That's how I have my bracket set up. It'll be -2, -1, 0, +1, +2 for exposure, and it'll do that with 1 click. So I'll go, so it just did 5 photos really quick. Each of those photos has a different exposure. So that's bracketing. Again, see part 1, or is it part 2 of this video series for where the bracketing information is. You could bracket by film simulation. Again, with a single shutter press, you could get up to 3 photos where you change the film simulation, which is the look of the photo. You could do a dynamic range bracket where you can change how the camera is exposing for the different brights and highlights. And then last, you have the focus bracket settings, so you could change those settings here as well in the drive mode. The HDR setting is kind of funky, and that's why I skipped it. So I've done a little reading on it, and to be honest, I'm not 100% sure I really understand how it works, so I honestly skipped it. So if you want to read about it, feel free to do so. The panorama setting, what that lets you do, if you enter that in your drive mode, then you can take a sequence of photos going left to right, and it will then combine them into 1 photo in camera when you're done. And lastly is the multiple exposure. So in camera again, with you have this setting, you can tell the camera, I want to create anywhere from 2 to 7 photos, and it will create a combined photo from all those images. So one of the neat things about mirrorless cameras is that you're seeing what you're seeing on the screen. So when you create multiple exposures, it's kind of fun because you can see the first photo and then the second photo, third photo, or however many you do right on the screen, so you can help create the composition. So I'm going to do a really quick one here. So I'm going to do one here. We'll do a quick click. So once you create the first photo, on the back of the screen, there's some buttons. And what you have to do is click OK to say, okay, I'm ready to make the next photo. And now let's see if I can get that focused. So sorry, you're looking at my forehead. But now you can see I have that first photo is overlaid with, and you can see it sitting there. And now I can compose the second photo to interact with that first photo to create a new photo. Oops, I just did accidentally. So now I'm going to click OK. Now I have a second overlay, and I'll show you what that looks like here. When you save it, it will save a JPEG. Just be aware of that. It's saving a JPEG file, not a RAW file. I know that's quite a work of art, but you get the idea, hopefully a little bit. And again, you can combine up to, I believe it's 9 photos, depending on your camera, into that multiple exposure. And it's, again, another fun thing to play with in your camera to try and create different moods, different scenes, a unique way of expressing yourself with your camera. All right, so that's drive mode. Let's move on to the Q menu. The Q stands for quick. And on the back of your camera, somewhere, depending on your camera, it's in various locations, there is a Q button. And once you click that Q button, you will be taken to a menu screen that has some options for you to change different settings. So next up is the Q menu. And the Q menu is great for functions you access relatively regularly, and it's a faster way to get to them than going through the menu and remembering, is that in the AF or the IQ menu or the wrench menu or the setup menu. So you can have up to 16 slots on the back of your screen where you can access quickly different settings. This is something that is, again, very personal. Which settings you will access frequently will depend on your specific temperament and the way you use your camera, your photography needs. So the way you get to these settings to set it up, what goes in each of those tiles, is through the wrench menu, which is the setup menu, and then you go to button dial setting, then go to edit/save quick menu setting, choose however many slots you want. You can do 16, 12, 8, or 4, and then go over to the next menu with your either your joystick or your directional pad, and then now you are accessing those different tiles, and you can choose what setting goes in each of those things based on your needs. You got to set up the setup a little bit. So there you go. So once you've got the Q menu set up, it's really handy because now when I hit the Q button, I have, in my case, 16 different settings that I can get to quickly without having to remember if it's in the IQ or the autofocus or the setup or the camera setting. So this is a quick way to access settings that you access more frequently. And then the way you use this is you choose with the joystick which setting you want to change. And once you have chosen a setting, then once it's selected, you use the back wheel, the rear command wheel, to scroll through the options for that specific setting. So again, I encourage you to experiment with your Q menu, try different groupings of elements that you might access frequently. I have Face Eye Auto Detect in there. I have a slow-mo for video set up in there and a couple other settings that I access more than occasionally. It's a faster way to get there than going through the menu and then navigating through all those many options there. Okay, next up we have what you see through the viewfinder display, decoding that. What is that all about? Because there's a lot of information there. So I want to walk through those different elements so you can understand how they work. So the viewfinder display will potentially vary based on your camera as far as what options are available to you. So what gets displayed here is accessed through the setup menu, which is the wrench icon. And then you go to screen setting, scroll down to screen number 3, at least on my camera, and it's called Display Custom Setting, DISP Custom Setting. And then you go to the right on that, and then you can choose to check or uncheck what is visible here. So these are the options I've chosen, and I'll share a little bit about each by segment. We'll start at the top. So the top here, the different icons are mostly showing about image capture and what's going on with that. I have a Bluetooth icon on the left, whether I'm active, have Bluetooth active. The next setting to the right is about video capture, what mode I'm in. And then the next display shows how much video capture time I have left. The next, the 1 and the 2, my camera has 2 card slots, so it's showing me that I'm recording to both card slots. The R underneath number 1 means I'm recording RAW there. The J under the number 2 means I'm recording JPEG into that card. The next number shows how many photos left I can save given the quality settings I have. And then lastly is the RAW and what kind of RAW file I'm saving, and then what kind of JPEG I'm saving. So there's a lot of little data there. Most of the time, the things I'm noticing are how much recording time I have left and how many images I have space for on my camera. All right, let's move to the left side of the screen. So this is your exposure meter. And at 0 is the quote-unquote correct exposure. So that will be, if your camera is in program mode, what exposure your camera will make. It will create exposure at 0. The -1 through -5 means your photo will be darker by -1 stop or 2 stops or 3, 4, 5 stops, or plus will get your photo brighter by 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stops here on the display. This is currently showing -5 stops because I have the lens cap on to make it easier to see the display. Next, at the bottom of the screen, we have a bunch of information about how it's making photos. So it shows you the focus mode. I'm in autofocus C, which is continuous, manual exposure mode, and then my SS, which is shutter speed, is 1/60th of a second. And that little half moon that's showing above the SS, that means the shutter speed is set to the front dial, and I can change it there. The F is f5.0, and then my ISO is 5000, and the upside down kind of half moon means that I am changing that setting with my rear command dial. And lastly, down there, I have my battery status. I have 4 out of 5 bars of battery left. On the right-hand side, we have some more information about what's going on with making photos. At the top is the touchscreen settings. I currently have my touchscreen set to off. If your camera has this touchscreen, that's where it'll display how you have that configured. Next, in the middle on the right-hand side, I'm showing my film simulation, which I have applied, which is classic Chrome. And then a dynamic range setting, which is, again, we talked about that in part number 1 of this video. Dynamic range of 100 means it's basically not adding or taking away anything from the photo through dynamic range settings. And lastly, down at the bottom is boost. And what that's about is display settings so that things operate more quickly. So it has a faster refresh rate on my electronic viewfinder. And lastly, I wanted to let you know I'll include some resources at the bottom of this video, a link to a resource page where on my website where you can access other things that I hope will be helpful in learning how to set up your Fujifilm camera, because I don't have all the answers, and there's still lots of things for me to learn on this camera, even though I've been using it for 10 plus years. So that concludes this video series. I hope you have found it at least a little bit helpful, a good start, and hopefully get you excited and feeling a little less intimidated maybe by the computer that your camera is. I hope you will pick up your camera and go out and try some different things. Remember, you can't hurt your camera. As far as changing settings won't hurt anything. There's always reset if you get really stuck. Speaking of getting stuck, if you feel stuck and you have more questions, please leave them in the comments down below. I'm glad to answer those. Also, I'll leave a link down below to my email contact form on my website if you'd like to ask me questions there. I hope this is a good start for you. I hope you have many adventures ahead with your camera, that you get to find out all the ways you can create with it and have fun exploring with your camera. So thanks for watching this video series. Again, I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to connecting with you potentially on social media. Again, I've left those links down below. I'd love to see what you're creating. So that's it for now. Until I see you in a future video, I hope you stay safe, stay well, and have fun creating photos. Bye for now.